Hi, Mike.
Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, not too bad.
How was your weekend?
I guess all right. Yeah.
Yeah, we went to Vandergrift. You know where that is? It's like up 28. It's
Okay.
like between Kansas and Pittsburgh. We go up
Okay.
20. And they had like a Christmas festival there. New Vrindavan devotees were there. And both days. And I went up there too. And they were chanting and they had a little booth, It's not a very big town, but they have this annual Christmas extravaganza,
Mhm.
and I was standing there on the street and I had this hat on, and this lady comes up to me. She was like working out and she was playing basketball in the athletic facility behind the kirtan or the devotees. And she was looking at my hat, and I was, she was reminded her of some kind of group that she was with before, And so I talked to her and said, I had this interfaith, kind of presentation. I'd written a thing about, Christ and Krishna that was like comparing the similarities between Christ's birth and Krishna's birth.
Mhm.
You got Herod and then you got Kamsa, and it was like it's a really striking analogy or likeness in the different pastimes of these two personalities. And so I was talking to her about that, and I sold her a book actually called Christ and Krishna. It was written by my guru. But then I was nipped because I'm not supposed to sell that book. And so, but anyway, I had some prasadam and chanted for a while. And it was nice, a lot of people heard the holy name, and there was a couple of fired up book distributors there. They're going his name is Brandon. He's from New Vrindavan, young man. He was distributing books store to store during the whole festival with his friend. And he asked me if, Anuradha, the temple president, asked me, maybe we should go there, to the kirtan center, and have kirtan. And so, yeah, I said, sure, come on over, And so Brandon asked me today if this morning you was wondering about the prasadam situation. I said, talk to Ashley, because she can arrange to have some more prasadam made for whoever, you're going to bring with you from New Vrindavan. So that'd be good. If they start coming on a regular basis, that would be great. Then you got all these fired up brahmacharis, distributing books and doing Harnam. This is like a marathon this month,
Mhm. Yeah.
Hey, it's a live to give, it's the annual Christmas marathon that's been happening since, NISCON began, ISKCON began to distribute books anyway. And so it's going to go on until Christmas. And it happens to be every year, it's the Gita Jayanti, which is the speaking of the Bhagavad-gītā. So it's really, actually last year, I don't know if you knew this, but the Gita Jayanti fell on Christmas Day. Last year it was really auspicious. So, but this year it falls on the 14th, I believe, but it doesn't matter because they're going to do the whole book distribution marathon, the entire month of November and December, I remember Yamani Yamadas Brahmachari, he was saying, now they keep on extending the Christmas back and back and back, This year we are beginning our Christmas marathon in May. He's so funny. But yeah, these guys are fired up. Brandon went to, one day he was in West Virginia University, and then he was, in Morgantown, and then the next day he was in East West Liberty University. They usually go and set up their table, and then they chant in those college towns, and they distribute a lot of books. So I guess we're beginning. Maitreya said he's going to be a little late. I don't know if you saw that message.
Okay.
But he's doing horse stuff. So we'll just begin here. Go ahead and read text 57.
Sure. Yasarvatranab hi snehas tata prapya subhas subham napina datina dveshti tasha prajna pratisthita. Synonyms. Ya, one who. Sarvatra, everywhere. Anab hi sneha, without affection. Tat, that. Prapya, achieving. Shubha, good. Ashubham, evil. Na, never. Abhinandati, praises. Na, never. Veshti, envies. Tasya, his. Prajna, perfect knowledge. Pratisthita, fixed. Translation. In the material world, one who is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain, neither praising it nor despising it, is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge.
Purport. There is always some upheaval in the material world, which may be good or evil. One who is not agitated by such material upheavals, who is unaffected by good and evil, is to be understood to be fixed in Krishna consciousness. As long as one is in the material world, there is always the possibility of good and evil, because this world is full of duality. But one who is fixed in Krishna consciousness is not affected by good and evil, because he's simply concerned with Krishna, who is all good, absolute. Such consciousness in Krishna situates one in a perfect transcendental position called technically samadhi. This reminds me of a couple of things. Reminds me of the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, the Bhagavad-gītā. And there Krishna says, he tells Uddhava, you know, if you try to criticize or praise somebody, you see bad or good in any kind of material quality in anybody else, this disturbs your consciousness. So don't do that. You know, you have to be fixed in your consciousness. And if you're agitated by, you know, different things that go on, then you're always, you know, deviated from your duty, which is to render devotional service to Krishna. So it also reminds me of Emerson. He had a essay. I used to read Emerson all the time when I was in high school. He was like my favorite author. I think he had something to do with my coming to Krishna consciousness, because he was always pointing out, like, I would write in my diary, I would quote him, you know. I wrote the only books worth reading are either transcendental or extraordinary. I wrote that down in my journal in like 1973. But anyway, he said, in the American Scholar, he said, that's an essay. It was delivered to some society, you know, back then. A lot of times these people in the 19th century, they would, instead of writing something, they would deliver it, you know, as an oration, you know, to different, you know, like the Harvard Divinity School. He delivered that to address to the Harvard Divinity School. And in the American Scholar, you know, it's like some kind of college, university, or fraternity or something like that. But anyway, he said in that essay, you know, like the whole material world is like agitated all the time by these particular ups and downs, you know. So some war, some man, some, you know, some trade is like, you know, some like controversy is cried up by one half of the pop world and cried down and by the other half, as if everything depended on this particular up and down. But he said, let not the scholar, you know, let it not disturb the mind of the scholar, this particular up and down. Let, you know, as the newspaper directs and as the wind blows, all these things are happening in the material world, and everybody's completely caught up in it. That's all the news cycles are, you know, completely hyping whatever is going on in the present moment. But Emerson said, let the scholar be fixed in his determination that a pop gun is a pop gun, even though the ancient and honorable of the world declare it to be the crack of doom. So I thought that was a pretty instructive thing. You know, it's just like, don't let anything agitate your mind. Just fix on Krishna. Think of what he wants for you to concentrate on, and instead of your own mind be torn around and ripped around by the 24-hour news cycle or whatever it is that's going on in the world, you know. go ahead with text 58.
Sure. Yara samharate chayam kurmo ganiva sarvasha indriyani indriyarthebhyas tasya prajna pratishtita. Synonyms: yada, when, samhartate, winds up, cha, also, ayam, he, kurma, tortoise, angani, limbs, eva, like, sarvasha, altogether, indriyani, senses, indriya arthebhya, from the sense objects, tasya, his, prajna, consciousness, pratishta, fixed. Translation: one who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects, as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell, is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness.
I love these analogies. Like, here, the senses are compared to serpents. There's another analogy about a tortoise, about a tortoise draws its limbs within the shell. That means the sense objects are, withdrawn from all the sense within to their, objects. But anyway, there's another analogy that's similar. The tortoise lays its eggs on the ocean, in the ocean, the sea tortoise, and then on the sand. And then the mother of the eggs meditates on the eggs. So that's just like the devotee thinking about Krishna. And then the eggs hatch and then they go out to sea. But there's so many similarities between Krishna consciousness and the activities of various species. But let me read this purport here. The test of a yogi, devotee, or self-realized soul is that he's able to control his senses according to his plan. Most people, however, are servants of the senses. That's called Go-dasa. Go-dasa means servant of the senses. Goswami means controller of the senses. Most people, however, are servants of the senses and are thus directed by the dictations of the senses. That is the answer to the question as to how the yogi is situated. The senses are compared to venomous serpents. They want to act very loosely and without restriction. The yogi or the devotee must be very strong to control the serpents, like a snake charmer. He never allows them to act independently. That's why you have to, like, Bhaktivedanta Thakur, he says, you have to beat the mind with a shoe every morning and evening, in the morning you have to beat your mind with a shoe, and in the evening you beat your mind with a broom. But that way, you tell your mind, don't listen to the sense objects. You have to control your mind. So, because the mind is the controller of the senses, and the senses are controlled by the mind. So, and then ultimately, the intelligence is controlled by the mind, and then ultimately, the soul is even more powerful than the intelligence. So, if we're always conducted by the soul, then we can control our senses, because otherwise they're like serpents. So he never allows them to act independently. There are many injunctions in the revealed scriptures. Some of them are do-nots and some of them are do's. Unless one is able to follow the do's and the do-nots, restricting oneself from sense enjoyment, it's not possible to be firmly fixed in Krishna consciousness. There's another verse that says, one who is attracted by the objects of sense enjoyment and is bewildered by such sense gratificatory activities, the resolute determination of devotional service does not take place. So you have to control your senses in order to actually think about the Lord continuously. Otherwise, it's always like hit and miss. You think of the Lord sometimes, and then you're attracted to sense objects, and then you do all kinds of nonsense, and then you forget Krishna. And sometimes Krishna even has to appear to ourselves in dreams. So he wakes you up, but then the next day, you're thinking about Krishna in the morning once you have a nice dream about Krishna, but then during the day, you go back and do whatever it was that you were doing before, so you can never be steady in Krishna consciousness unless your mind is controlled and the senses are controlled by the mind and by the soul ultimately, because you have to have a higher taste than, you know, these lower sense gratificatory activities. You know, like that guy, wasn't in, I forget his name, but Yamunacharya, I believe. He said, every time I think of sex with a woman, he was a king, you know, so he had probably lots and lots of sex. But he said, every time, you know, thinking about Radha and Krishna, every time I think of sex life, my mouth curls in distaste and I spit at the thought. So he's like, it's such a nice thing that's even more, you know, you become automatically distasteful for any kind of thing other than Krishna consciousness. It's an automatic thing. You don't have to try separately or clench your fist and restrain your senses in that way, but it's actually automatic. As you advance in Krishna consciousness, your taste for sense objects diminishes. Remember when I first, you know, was thinking about Krishna consciousness and was like contemplating, I would go to bars, I'd sit down, but I wouldn't have a drink, and I wasn't even interested in women. I was just like, I would, you know, like have 7-Up and sit there for a while, and then I'd just get bored, you know, because, you know, back in the 70s, you know, like Marshall Tucker Band was playing, and I wasn't even interested in that either. But anyway, you actually lose your taste, and that's a kind of a symptom of advancement in spiritual life. If you lose your taste for sense gratification in general, then that shows that you're advancing in Krishna consciousness. The best example set herein is the tortoise. The tortoise can at any moment wind up his senses and exhibit them again at any time for particular purposes. Similarly, the senses of a Krishna conscious person are used only for some particular purpose in the service of the Lord and are withdrawn otherwise. Arjuna is taught here to use his senses for the service of the Lord instead for his own satisfaction. Keeping the senses always in the service of the Lord is the example set by the analogy of the tortoise who keeps the senses within. It's really important to be in control. I mean, if you're out of control, it's like that diorama they have, you see, probably seen it before. There's a rider on the chariot and the 5 senses of the 5 horses. And, you know, the soul is in the back seat and the mind is driving the chariot. So with the senses in control, you're out of control. But if you really have firm determination in devotional service, you want to control, you want to take the reins and control the horses. They're like wild horses. So it's really, really important. Otherwise, you can't even understand who Krishna is or what we're doing. You know, it's just like you're in the back seat of a chariot that's going wild, like a crazy train, you know, to use a modern analogy. Let's see here. I guess we'll trade since there's only one paragraph. I'll read the first text and you can read the purport afterwards. Vishaya vinivartante nirasya dehina rasavarjam rasopasya paramvishtana vartate. This is a really important verse. That's what I was saying just now. Because these things are automatically, you know, logical. Krishna is going through these points and you have to have a higher taste. Synonyms: Vishaya, object for sense enjoyment, vinivartante, are practiced to be refrained from, niraharasya, by negative restrictions, dehina, for the embodied, rasa varjam, giving up the taste, rasa, sense of enjoyment, api, although there is, api, his param, far superior things, vishta, by experiencing nivartante, he ceases from. Translation: although the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains, but ceasing such engagement by experiencing a higher taste, he's fixed in consciousness. Go ahead.
Purport. Unless one is transcendently situated, it is not possible to cease from sense enjoyment. The process of restriction from sense enjoyment by rules and regulations is something like restricting a diseased person from certain types of eatables. The patient, however, neither likes such restrictions nor loses his taste for eatables. Similarly, sense restriction by some spiritual processes like Ashtanga Yoga in the matter of yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhanya, etc., is recommended for less intelligent persons who have no better knowledge. But one who has tasted the beauty of the Supreme Lord Krishna in the course of his advancement in Krishna consciousness no longer has a taste for dead material things. Therefore, restrictions are there for the less intelligent neophytes in the spiritual advancement of life, But such restrictions are only good until one actually has a taste for Krishna consciousness. When one is actually Krishna conscious, he automatically loses his taste for pale things.
Yeah, that's really amazing. You know, you have to choose, you know, that you have to like, okay, I understand theoretically what I should be doing. I shouldn't be like letting my mind and senses go wild here. I have to choose Krishna. Okay, Maitreya is finally back here. Maitreya, you there?
Hare Krishna.
Haribo. What happened? You just at the store, the horse store?
Yeah, then we had a plumber visit. You know, they give you time between now and midnight, and then they show up whenever they show up.
Yeah, right. I like those guys. They tell you, okay, well, we'll be here from there and there, you know, and then they hardly ever show up on time. You know, it's like, it's crazy. There's a whole comic bit about that. But how was your weekend?
It was great, actually.
What happened? What did you do?
No horses escaped. That was a big plus.
Oh my God. How is that great? That's just Krishna's mercy, right? You look at everything at Krishna's mercy.
Yeah. We had a parade in Mount Vernon with my son plays in the marching band. So that was always exciting.
Oh, you were in a parade? Was it Christmas parade?
Yeah, Christmas parade.
Yeah, a lot of people. That's what I did last weekend. The New Vrindavan devotees all went to this town northeast of Pittsburgh, about 40 miles northeast, called Vandergrift, which is like written between Pittsburgh and Katanning. And they set up a table, or they had permission to set up a booth right next to this Christians. And you know, they were on the other side of the street, kind of way at the end, you know, because you know Krishna always comes last in the material world. But anyway, they had like a mat for like chanting, a big blanket for chanting on the next to the tent. And they were selling books. One devotee, one fired up brahmachari is going around with his friend and going store to store. And I went there, actually had this hat on that you see exist. And this woman came out. She was like working out with this, you know, basketball court. And she was attracted to the hat. And she was, because it reminded her something that some group that she was with, because it's got all the interfaith symbols, you know, coexist. That's the name of our kirtan center. My house is the Coexist Kirtan Center, which is actually in the Shringadev Mandir. But, you know, so I was talking to her and I sold her Christ and Krishna. And then I got nipped from the temple president because she saw the transaction. And we're not supposed to talk about Bhakti Bhat, you know, not supposed to like distribute those books because it may give a bad name to the New Vrindavan, you know. But anyway, it was a good, I'm just glad there that I went and did that little tiny bit of service for my spiritual master. I'm proud of getting nipped for it. Anyway, because that's a classic book. I don't care what anybody says. That's a really, really great book. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, you know, even though if you have some bad thoughts, you know, and anything in that book, I challenge anybody to say what's bad about that book. Even if it is, you know, there's no bad thought. You take from where you left off. He was a pioneer in the interfaith preaching, and you can take that and go with it. So what are you going to do? Like, how many generations are going to hide these books from people? There's pallets of those books in New York City right now. And so what are you going to do with them? You can be used in Christian service. So don't, you know, be like Falgu Vairagi and not use them for Christian service. You got to use them. You got to distribute them. So that's what Adi Purush is doing in New York. You know, I was trying to hide them from the temple authorities, but I didn't get away with it. Anyway, why don't you read text 60, Maitreya.
Okay. Yatato hyapi konteya purushasya vipaschita indriyani pramatini haranti prasabhammana. Yatata, while endeavoring, he certainly, api, in spite of, konteya, O son of Kunti, purusasya, of a man, vipaschita, full of discriminating knowledge, indriyani, the senses, pramatini, agitating, haranti, throw, prasabam, by force, manaha, the mind. The senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind even of a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them.
Mike, you want to read the first paragraph with the Sanskrit and the text?
Yes, sir. Purport. There are many learned sages, philosophers, and transcendentalists who try to conquer the senses. But in spite of their endeavors, even the greatest of them sometimes fall victim to material sense enjoyment due to the agitated mind. Even Vishvamrita, a great sage and perfect yogi, was misled by Menaka into sex enjoyment, although the yogi was endeavoring for sense control with severe types of penance and yoga practice. And of course, there are so many similar instances in the history of the world. Therefore, it is very difficult to control the mind and senses without being fully Krishna conscious. Without engaging the mind in Krishna, one cannot cease such material engagements. A practical example is given by Sri Yamunacharya, a great saint and devotee, who says, Yadavari mama cheta Krishna harar ravinde, nava navarasa damani ujyam yaptaram rantam asit, tadavari bata nari sangame, smarayamane, aviti mukha vikara shustu nishti vanamcha. Since my mind has been engaged in the service of the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, I have been enjoying an ever new transcendental humor. Whenever I think of sex life with a woman, my face at once turns from it and I spit at the thought.
That's amazing. We were just talking about that, Maitreya. Somehow or other, my mind just goes to this when we're talking about how to control the mind. And it says in the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the canto of the Rasa pastimes, it's the last verse, I believe. It says that if you want to cure that disease of lust, just think about the pastimes of Krishna and the gopis. It will be so attractive. I love that ever new transcendental humor. So that when you're actually absorbed in that, you're not interested in anything else. Everything else is just like, the unbelievable, distasteful type of distraction, But, when you're in the material world, and you have a material body, it's very difficult. So you have to have the higher taste. Let's see here. Krishna consciousness is such a transcendentally nice thing that automatically material enjoyment becomes distasteful. It is as if a hungry man had satisfied his hunger by a sufficient quantity of nutritious eatables. Maharaj Ambarish was also conquered a great yogi, the Rasamuni, simply because his mind was engaged in Krishna consciousness. Savai mana Krishna padara vindiyo vashamsi vakutna vanandavarane. Mike, why don't you read the text for 61?
Sure. Tani sarvani samyamayam uta ashita matparam ashehi yas yendriyani tasya prajna pratishtita. Tani, those senses, sarvani, all, samyamya, keeping under control, yukta, engaged, asita, should be situated, matpara, in relationship with me, vashe, in full subjugation, he, certainly, yasya, one whose, indriyani, senses, tasya, his, prajna, consciousness, pratishtita, fixed. Translation. One who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence.
I was just telling Mike, I'll let you read the purport, but I was just telling Mike that it's actually a great relief to be able to control the senses. Otherwise, it's like you're on the back of the chariot, with that diorama with the horses going wild, and the mind is driving, but the horses are out of control. But if you take the reins of the mind and keep them under control, then you can be steady in Krishna consciousness. Because one who is bewildered and attracted to the sense objects can't have steady intelligence. You can't be fixed in Krishna consciousness unless you're your mind is controlled. So you have to like, okay, my dear mind, you have to keep it under control. Why don't you read the purport well, actually, that's a pretty long. You just read the purport, Maitreya, or the first paragraph.
That the highest conception of yoga perfection is Krishna consciousness is clearly explained in this verse. And unless one is Krishna conscious, it is not at all possible to control the senses. As cited above, the great sage Durvasa Muni picked a quarrel with Maharaj Ambarish. And Durvasa Muni unnecessarily became angry out of pride and therefore could not check his senses. On the other hand, the king, although not as powerful a yogi as the sage, but a devotee of the Lord, silently tolerated all the sage's injustices and thereby emerged victorious. The king was able to control his senses because of the following qualifications, as mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 9, Chapter 4, text 18 through 20. Savai mana Krishna padara vindayor, vachamshi vaikunta gunanuvarnane, Karov harer mandira marjanadishu, shrutim chakaratchuta satkarodaye, mukunda lingalaya darshana drisho, jadbrigya gatra sparshalinga sangamam, kramam chatadpada saroja sorabe, srimatulasya rasanam tararpite, pado hare kshetra padaru sarpane, shiro rishikesha padabhivandane, kamanda dasye Natu kama kamyaya yatot tamashloka janashrayarati.
Yeah, what exactly did Maharaj Ambarish do to piss off Durvasa? Do you remember?
Durvasa went to the river to bathe.
Oh, that's
And
right.
at that time, the time for breaking the fast came. And because he was fasting to bestow the benefits of Ekadashi on his citizens, but he didn't want to offend his guest by taking a meal in his absence, so he just took a few drops of water. And the sage Durvasa was such a jerk that he got greatly offended by that. And he plucked the hair from his head and he conjured a huge demon who was actually going to kill the king.
Right, right.
So
he actually could understand because he was like, he knew the mind, so he knew what he was doing, even though he was bathing, right? And he knew that he had taken a sip of water.
When he returned, he could understand. Yeah.
Right, right.
And then he got his ass kicked by Krishna.
He had ESP. But yeah, he was pretty envious. But I think he picked the wrong fight. Maharaj Ambarish was pure devotee. You don't mess with them. King Ambarish fixed his mind on the lotus feet of Krishna, gauging his words and describing the abode of the Lord, his hands in cleansing the temple of the Lord, his ears in hearing the pastimes of the Lord, his eyes in seeing the form of the Lord, his body in touching the body of the devotee, his nostrils in smelling the flavor of the flowers offered to the lotus feet of the Lord, his tongue in tasting the tulsi leaves offered to him, his legs in traveling to the holy place where his temple is situated, and his head in offering obeisances unto the Lord, and his desires in fulfilling the desires of the Lord. All these qualifications made him fit to become a Matpara devotee of the Lord. That's what Lord Chaitanya did. You know, he just traveled all over India. He went to all the holy places. And, you know, I was just reading about how, you know, the Kumars, you know, they were impersonalists, but even, you know, the Atmaram verse, even the impersonalists are attracted to the pastimes of Krishna. You know, one of the Kumars, when Vishnu came after they offended, after the giant Vijay offended them, the Kumars were attracted by the smell of the tulsi leaves and saffron that were on Krishna's lotus feet. It's so powerful. And so they actually became their consciousness of Krishna awakened by that. So, you know, that gives you faith in Maitreya, you there still? I lost you. What happened?
Tripped a wire.
Oh, okay.
Connected.
Anyway, you can read the last paragraph there, Maitreya.
The word matpara is most significant in this connection. How one can become matpara is described in the life of Maharaj Ambarish. Srila Baladev Bijabhushan, a great scholar and acharya in the line of the matpara, remarks, matpara bhakti prabhavena sarindriya vijaya purvika svatna drisha sulabdate bhava. The senses can be completely controlled only by the strength of devotional service to Krishna. Also, the example of fire is sometimes given. Quote, as a blazing fire burns everything within a room, Lord Vishnu, situated in the heart of a yogi, burns up all kinds of impurities. End quote. The Yoga Sutra also prescribes meditation on Vishnu and not meditation on the void. The so-called yogis who meditate on something other than the Vishnu form simply waste their time in a vain search after some phantasmagoria. We have to be Krishna conscious, devoted to the personality of Godhead. This is the aim of real yoga.
It's amazing that just by concentrating on Krishna, Krishna is so powerful. If you put your mind on Krishna, you can completely give up all kinds of sense gratification. That's just like, that's amazing, because everybody in the whole world is attracted to sense gratification, but Krishna can, just like, all the hippies that Prabhupada talked to in the Lower East Side, they gave up everything, and that could happen with anyone in the material world. That's why Lord Chaitanya is the savior of the most fallen. Everybody's addicted to all kinds of, sinful activities, but these things become insignificant if you just, and you can control your senses if you focus on Krishna. That is like the goal. If you can control your senses, you become steady in your Krishna consciousness, and then you're on the path. It's a straight and narrow path, but you'll eventually lead to steadiness.
Well, this text 62 is nice, because up to now he's been saying what can happen if you're perfect or if you do this, but there's really not been very much instruction. Finally, we get some
right. Now he talks about like how if you let the senses go. Why don't you read that text, Maitreya?
Hayato vishayam pumsang sangas teshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kamat krodha bijayate.
Okay, Mike, you want to read the synonyms and translation? You got to run out of time here, but go ahead.
Yayata, while contemplating, Vishayan, sense objects, Pumsha, of a person, Sangha, attachment, Teshu, in the sense object, Upajayate, develops, Sangat, from attachment, Sanjayate, develops, Kama, desire, Kamat, from desire, Krodha, anger, Abhijayate, becomes manifest. The translation, while contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them, and from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises.
Okay, I'll try to read this purport. I don't know if we're going to run out of time, but I'll just probably wrap it up here. One who is not Krishna conscious is subjected to material desires while contemplating the objects of the senses. The senses require real engagements, and if they're not engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, they will certainly sink engagement in the service of materialism. In the material world, everyone, including Lord Shiva and Lord Brahma, not to say nothing of the other demigods in the heavenly planets, are subjected to the influence of sense objects, and the only method to get out of this puzzle of material existence is to become Krishna conscious. Lord Shiva was deep in meditation, but when Parvati agitated him for sense pleasures, he agreed to the proposal, and as a result, Kartikeya was born. When Haridas Thakur was a young devotee of the Lord, he was similarly allured by the incarnation of Maya Devi, but Haridas easily passed the test because of his unalloyed devotion to Lord Krishna. As illustrated in the above mentioned verse of Sri Yamunacharya, sincere devotee of the Lord shuns all material sense enjoyment due to his higher taste for spiritual enjoyment in the association of the Lord. That is the secret of success. One who is not therefore in Krishna consciousness, however powerful he may be in controlling the senses, by artificial repression is sure to ultimately fail, for the slightest thought of sense pleasure will agitate him to gratify his senses. Just like they say, what is that one verse that talks about like the slightest movement of a woman's eyebrow can cause the biggest conquerors to fall down, And look at all the people who have done that in the history of the world, Cleopatra.
Remember that darshan Devanrita Swami gave at the time? He was saying, he said, it's not their fault, but the nature of women and man is butter near fire. If the butter's near the fire, you don't have to conduct research to know what's happening. The butter is melting. And he said, for a man, the woman's face is like, just look into my eyes, dive in, and you can swim forever. The Brahmachari
I know.
doesn't look
That's why he was so, the Devanrita Swami was expert. He took your mind and he reeled it out like a videotape. He was expert in in revealing everyone's mind just exactly as it happens. But I remember Devanrita Swami was giving in Flagstaff, Arizona. We did a program at this one hippie's house, and the whole wall of his house was covered with Grateful Dead tapes, and there were so many girls there, and they're all beautiful. And I was thinking, oh my God, I was like looking at all these girls, and then I was trying to concentrate. If you don't have the higher taste, though, you're going to get allured. And oh my God, Devanrita Swami gave that guy such a hard time, though. I mean, he was like, he was very expert in completely destroying you. And my friend from Tucson, he said, boy, if I had that tape, because it was recorded, if I had that tape, I would just burn it, because he said, this Krishna consciousness is really, really practical. And Devanrita Swami retorted, he said, yeah, practical. He was just toking on a joint, smoking this and rubbing this and doing this and that. And he said, yeah, it's practical, but he completely destroyed him. But that was, he was always expert in that, but he went a little bit too far sometimes. And I think he turned some people off, but he was a great preacher, I'll tell you that. But, I think he's mellowed out in his old age now.
One of the things that it seems like is coming up a lot in this chapter, correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like it's really presenting the process and the result as kind of being non-different in many ways. You go through the process of attempting to restrain the senses to become more Krishna conscious, and then by the mercy of Krishna, your senses are not as allured as much, and you're kind of rewarded with what you're doing in the first place, it seems like.
Well, we have to have a goal. What is the goal? The goal of life is Krishna, love of God. So if you're absorbed in Krishna and you are attracted by his message, just like I was saying, the transcendental humor of Krishna, Radha and Krishna, and the gopis, and if you're attracted like that, you spit at the thought of any kind of material sense gratification. So the goal is love of God. So if you have a firm idea of the goal, then the means to reach that goal is first of all to control the senses. Just like it was saying that the neophytes have to restrain the senses, but when you actually understand the goal and then forcibly the mind, restricts the sense, the objects, the mind restricts the senses from its objects by force, then you can actually concentrate the mind on Krishna. But without Krishna, you can't artificially do it.
Also bear in mind, this is the very beginning of the Bhagavad-gītā, and Arjuna is still overwhelmed. Right. So we're able to study these in a very philosophical frame of mind now from the comfort of our homes or Zoom or whatever. But at this point, Arjuna is still freaked out.
Oh, yeah, totally freaked out. He was crying.
And in some ways, this first couple of chapters is just a way to make Arjuna more and more humble, more and more realizing that he's not there and he needs a miracle for any of this stuff to actually happen. In fact, it takes all the way to the 6th chapter. He's still not convinced. He tells Krishna in the 6th chapter that the whole thing, just take it and pack it up, and I don't want it. It's impractical. It's unendurable.
Right. The
Finally, he's already supposedly surrendered and become his disciple, but he's still not convinced, and it takes more chapters and more. So anyway, there's a very dramatic aspect to this whole conversation as well.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the middle of a war, and
plus,
Arjuna,
they took his kingdom, the people that he trusted the most, the people that he loved the most, and they stabbing him in the back. So and he's still so humble. He's ready to just become a mendicant rather than take it back by force.
And that's very shameful for an honorable person like that back then. Are you kidding me? That it would be worse than death. But Krishna was very patient with him, and he said, if Have you, at the end of the 18th chapter, he said, have you understood all these things? Because he was willing to say it all again if he had to. But, Krishna's very expert. He's the best speaker. He's he guided Arjuna, and that's why this is such a classic book. It's meant for everybody. Anyway, I think we're going to get cut off here any minute, but I think because you're late a little bit, it's extended a tiny bit, because if you're 2-on-2 or 1-on-1, then it lets you do it as long as you want. But if it's more than 2 people, then it only gives you 40 minutes.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's the Zoom thing, unless you pay money. And I'm a cheap bastard, so I don't want to pay anything. I'm not going to give any huge corporation any money. So anyway, thank you very much.
There's also a free option from Google. You can do a Google meeting. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I'm going to have to look into that.
Yeah, they're free. Google has a lot of very interesting free tools.
I think even the Bhakti Center, they do their Zoom class, but at the same time, they're actually broadcasting it live on Facebook through their Bhakti Center group page. So I think you have to have at least 50 subscribers to your group page or to your YouTube channel in order to do that for free.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
So that's interesting, because Varshana Swami, he just started his own. We have a kind of a videographer there in New Vrindavan now, and he's putting together all the videos. I've taken like a dozen or so videos throughout the years of Varshana Maharaj, I sent him the links to those, and you can like transform them into files and then put them up on that page, And
if you have a link you can send me for Varshana's Swami's page, I'd love to see that.
Oh yeah, all you have to do is look it up. I can
Just
look it up right
Varshana
now.
Swami on YouTube.
Yeah, on the YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, he's such a great soul. You got to take advantage of these great souls before they leave the world. He's old.
I know. I had so many of my best friends have gone.
Just think of like if you had a chance to be with Prabhupada. Varshana Swami is like one of the most advanced devotees on the planet, as far as I'm concerned. He knows everything about these intimate, Rasika pastimes and stuff. Let me see if I can look it up right now before we end our class here. Search Varshana Swami. Varshana Swami.
Varshana Swami home program. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, that's me, actually. I recorded that. There it is.
Cool. Varshana Swami official. Okay.
I will send that link to both of you, and
Okay.
you will be very much blessed to listen to him, because he is.
Yeah, I remember one time with Sid, Bhaktisiddhanta Swami, when we got back from traveling Sankirtan, and we saw Varshana Swami just sort of ambling down by the temple. We said, Maharaj, well, he wasn't a Swami then. We said, well, his name was Kashyapa. We said, Kashyapa, come in the van. Come on in. And he says, can you tell us something about Advaitacharya? And he was like, oh, and he would get really serious. And we would just be on pins and needles, and say, and then he would just start talking all these things we'd never heard of about Advaitacharya.
I know, he knows stuff that nobody knows.
We didn't want to let him out of the van. We're like, and he could just go on like that for hours. It was amazing.
I know. And I remember one time he blew my mind. It was like a darshan in the middle, in the prasadam room, in the temple room, and he started talking about how the coward boys in Krishna were the coward boys were stolen by Brahma, and Brahma was regretful. He was saying, I've wasted half of my life. The first 150 trillion years of my life I've wasted. He was having a midlife crisis. And that would just blew my mind, because of the time scale, and the Vedic time scale is just unbelievable. And so he prayed to Krishna. He went to the Navadvip, and he prayed before Lord Chaitanya appeared. He said, I know you're going to come here, so I need to be. I could have been a coward boy. He was thinking, he was regretting this big creator. I was, so puffed up. I wanted to be a creator. I could have been a coward boy. I want to take part in your pastimes when you come to this world. And so Lord Chaitanya said, okay, you'll be in my pastimes. Your name, you'll be, take birth in a Muslim family, and you'll be there And, you know, I will make all the demigods drunk with the holy name, and you'll be there. And then he disappeared, and then Brahma fell down and he started crying. I mean, I've never heard this stuff before. Where do you get this stuff? I don't know. But anyway, that's what really attracted me first, because he knows so many things. He's got such deep realization.
We become fixed up by reading Srila Prabhupada's books. The Acharyas have all written in a gigantic transcendental library, and it's all just there waiting for us. I mean, we won't be able to touch it, part of it in this lifetime, but it's.
I read all Prabhupada's books, and then maybe 21 days and nights of continuous audio of like the other Acharyas in our line. But, you know, I was in anxiety, like reading Prabhupada's books. I was running out. I was like, what am I going to read? Now, oh yeah, we got the Ramayana, we got the Mahabharata. And
You can read the Bhagavatam over. I mean, I probably read it 30 times over the last 40 years.
I read the Bhagavatam. I read the Bhagavatam 3 times.
It's different every time, isn't it?
Śikṣāṣtaka the 3rd time with the Sanskrit and the synonyms, and it's really a beautiful poetry.
So you keep discovering backwaters that you didn't know were there the last time, and
yeah, I was just reading the past. You know, Chaitanya goes to Vrindavan, and I never even remembered this pastime. I remembered Jharkhanda, but I didn't remember the pastime about Lord Chaitanya. You know, listening to the parrots on the branch. They were like reciting verses for Lord Chaitanya. And then the male parrot spoke and the female parrot spoke, just like in Vrindavan.
Yeah.
And Chaitanya was completely in ecstasy.
I forgot about that.
When he was in Jagannath Puri, he had like, it was always in ecstasy, but when he was like on the road to Mathura, it was 100 times more.
Wow.
But then when he was in the forest of Vrindavan, it was hundreds of thousands of times more.
Wow. There's lots of little details, like how he would chant japa on his lotus fingers, and he made a fire in the morning to warm himself while he was.
Right, all that stuff, you know, it's just really, really descriptive. You know, when I read the Chaitanya Bhagavat, that book is so descriptive. You get
Childhood pastimes, yeah.
Visual idea of what they look like, all these different devotees. I get to know them, you know. Such a great book as the Chaitanya Bhagavat, and it reads really easily. I mean, Chaitanya Charitamrita is more philosophical, and that's great too.
Have you read the Brihad Bhagavatamrita by Sanatana Goswami?
Yeah, I read
That's
that.
a novel written by Sanatana Goswami. Amazing. And it was, the devotees thought it was a little big. So Rupa Goswami responded by writing the Laghu Bhagavatamrita, which is a completely different type of book. It's not a novel. It's more philosophical. It's not as nectar, frankly. I mean, the Brihad Bhagavatamrita is just an amazing story with a hero, you know, who develops and goes through different.
The hero goes up to the spiritual world and they're trying to find the best devotee, right?
Who's got the most mercy? Yeah.
The first one was Prahlad. Prahlad's my favorite devotee. And that was just the first one. Then you go up the scale, you know, all the way up to the gopis.
And he has amazing adventures. I mean, they're memorable adventures. That's the other thing. It's even the little details in these stories, you may think, you know, there's so much, you forget part of it, but some little detail will stay with you and you'll remember it every single day of your life from then on. So even at the time of death, you'll be thinking about one of these things and back home, back to Godhead.
Rupa Goswami, he wrote so many unbelievable books. I mean, you can't even imagine. Like, can you imagine like writing stuff like that? The Vidagdha Madhava and the Lalita Madhava?
Yeah, and we tried in my reading group, we tried reading the Lalita Madhava, or is it the Lalita Madhava, which is the one in Vrindavan. There's the Vidagdha and the Lalita.
Vrindavan is Vidagdha Madhava.
The Vidagdha Madhava, and it's really intimate, amazing pastimes. I mean, even just from a psychological point of view, it was like, if it was like a rich dessert, you know, it was like eating the frosting off the cake. It was kind of a relief to just go back to reading the Bhagavatam again after that.
When he started to read that, he was with the devotees, and the devotees with Lord Chaitanya, and Ramananda Roy was there, and Swarup Damodar, and they asked him to read a couple of verses, you know, and he was really shy. He didn't want to read it, you know, but and Lord Chaitanya, you know, when he read them, you know, Ramananda Roy said, you know, this is not just poetry. This is like a bucket of nectar being poured on your head. And so it's like, it's amazing. Have you ever read Ujjwala Nilamani? This is a continuation, a more elaborate description of the nectar of devotion.
Oh, I read parts of it, just little snippets of it.
Devotion. That's a really amazing book too, by Rupa Goswami. I think Banuswami translated that. He's a really good.
Goswami translates a lot of books. They're a little pricey
Yeah.
for me. I get them on Kindle, but like for instance, the Sad Sandarbhas of Jiva Goswami, they're just too
Right.
expensive. Each one is like $9, and you know I want to get them all. But
For a Kindle
yeah,
version?
yeah,
Yeah, I read a lot of his books. You know, sometimes I get my mentor, what's his name, Nadi Prushi. He sends me some of those because he's got everything on the database. So, but he sends me PDF files and stuff so I can read them online. I find it easier to read them online than reading a physical book.
yeah. Same here, because you can change the text size and make it bigger, right?
Yeah. I'm getting old. I need big text.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you very much. My wife is calling me for dinner. So
All right.
have a great day. Thank you, Mike. Thanks for participating. You're as solid as a rock every single week. Haribo.
You won't.